On December 8, 1991, 2 days after 4 teenage girls were found murdered in an Austin yogurt shop, a man was pulled over at a Border Patrol checkpoint on Interstate 10 in West Texas. He was driving a stolen truck and had a .380 pistol on him, same make and model as the gun used to kill at least one of those girls. He was arrested for the stolen vehicle, and the gun was confiscated. The agents at that checkpoint had no idea what they were holding. Austin detectives working the biggest case in the city's history, 500 miles east, had no idea he existed. That man drove through the system on a theft charge and disappeared. It took 34 years to find out who he was, and by the time they did, 4 innocent men had already paid for what he'd done. One of them was sent to death row. One of them is dead. Jennifer Harbison was 17. She worked the closing shift at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, a small frozen yogurt spot near North Cross Mall on the north side of Austin. Friday nights, she'd be there with her co-worker and close friend Eliza Thomas, also 17. They were high school kids pulling a weekend job, earning spending money, doing what teenagers in Austin did in 1991. The shop was in a strip mall off West Anderson Lane. Busy area, well lit, nothing sketchy about it. Jennifer's younger sister, Sarah, 15, came to the shop that evening with her friend Amy Ayers, who was 13. They were just there for a ride home. Jennifer would close up around 11, they'd all pile into the car, and that would be it. A routine Friday. 2 employees wrapping up their shift and 2 girls killing time until they could leave. Amy was the youngest. Her brother Sean was 19 at the time. When he talked about his sister later, the word that kept coming up was fighter. She didn't back down from anything. She was stubborn and physical and unafraid in the way that 13-year-olds can be when they haven't yet learned to be careful about those things. Shortly before midnight, a patrol officer driving down West Anderson Lane noticed flames inside the shop. Fire crews went in. When the blaze was under control and they reached the back of the building, they found all 4 girls. The first detective on scene was John Jones. He'd worked Austin homicide for years. He described what he saw that night as wholesale carnage. All 4 had been bound and gagged and shot in the head. 2 different guns had been used. At least one of the girls had been sexually assaulted. The shop had been doused with accelerant and torched, a deliberate attempt to burn away the evidence. It mostly worked. The fire destroyed most of the physical evidence in the building. Then the sprinkler system kicked in and damaged what the fire hadn't reached. Between the 2, investigators had almost nothing to work with. 2 things survived: a shell casing from one of the guns, a .380 that had rolled into a drain in the floor. And from beneath the fingernails of Amy Ayers, the 13-year-old, investigators recovered DNA. Skin cells from someone who wasn't her. She had fought her attacker hard enough to scratch him and trap his DNA under her nails. The medical examiner documented it during the autopsy. In 1991, neither piece could tell investigators much. The casing had no database to check against. The federal ballistics matching system didn't exist yet. The DNA couldn't be fully profiled with the technology they had. Both were sealed, logged, and placed in evidence storage. Austin in 1991 wasn't the city it is now. No tech industry yet, no sprawl, maybe 500,000 people. A college town, laid back, or the kind of place where parents sent their kids to work closing shifts at yogurt shops without thinking twice. 4 teenagers murdered in a strip mall on a Friday night broke something in the city. The mayor would say years later that it haunted Austin's soul. Thousands of tips came in and a task force was formed. Detectives chased every lead they could find. Over the years, more than 50 people confessed to the crime. Attention seekers, inmates trying to cut deals, people who were simply unwell. 2 men were arrested by Mexican authorities on a supposed confession that fell apart within weeks. A serial killer named Kenneth McDuff, active in Central Texas at the time and known for targeting young women, was investigated thoroughly and ruled out. On the day of his own execution in 1998, McDuff confessed to the yogurt shop murders. It wasn't him either. Every time Austin thought the case was about to break, It didn't. Detective Jones refused to sign off on any of it. Every time someone tried to close the case on a confession alone, he pushed back. Where's the physical evidence? Where's the gun? Or where's the DNA? He wanted proof or nothing, and that position eventually got him transferred out of homicide. But he was right. Not one of those confessions could be supported by a single piece of physical evidence. By 1999, the case was frozen. 8 years, no suspect, no movement. A new task force went back through everything and landed on 4 young men. Shortly after the murders in 1991, one of them, Maurice Pierce, who was a teenager at the time, had been arrested near North Cross Mall carrying a .22 revolver. He told police a friend named Forrest Wellborn had used the gun in the yogurt shop and told him about it. That thread pulled in 2 more names, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. All 4 knew each other. All 4 had been teenagers in '91. By 1999, they were in their mid-20s. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were interrogated over multiple days. In Scott's case, the sessions stretched past 12 hours. Critical portions weren't recorded, so there was no way to know what detectives said to them during those gaps. The stories both men gave were inconsistent. They contradicted each other on basic details of who did what. But both eventually said enough to implicate themselves and each other. Pierce was held in the county jail for 3 years waiting for trial. 3 years, locked up, waiting. Wellborn was charged, but 2 separate grand juries looked at the case and refused to indict. Springsteen was tried, convicted of capital murder, and sentenced to death. Scott was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Here's how it happened. The jury knew the DNA from the crime scene didn't match any of the 4 defendants. The prosecution acknowledged that, but told the jury it didn't matter. This was a robbery, not a sexual assault, and the DNA came from some unrelated encounter. The person who left it had nothing to do with the murders. Yet the jury bought it. Springsteen was 25 when they decided he should be executed. Scott's wife had a 3-year-old daughter at home. Austin believed it was over. It wasn't true. Outside of those confessions, there was nothing tying any of the 4 men to the crime. No fingerprints, no weapon recovered, no witness who placed any of them at the scene. The entire prosecution rested on words spoken under pressure in unrecorded interrogation rooms. And years later, more advanced testing proved the prosecution's theory wrong. The blood and the semen from the crime scene came from the same person, one man, which meant this was a sexual assault, and the killer had left his DNA behind. That DNA excluded all 4 defendants. Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, Wellborn, none of them matched. The profile belonged to someone else entirely, someone who wasn't in any database anywhere in the country. 7 jurors from the original trials would later say they wouldn't have convicted if they'd known that. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals threw out both convictions in 2006 and 2007. Springsteen and Scott were released in 2009. But released isn't exonerated. The charges were dropped, but nobody stood in front of a camera and said these men are innocent. The suspicions stayed. For the next 16 years, all 4 lived as the yogurt shop suspects. Wellborn lost friends, couldn't hold a job, was homeless for a period. Scott's marriage ended. His daughter grew up without him. He said later the conviction didn't just take years, it took the life he was supposed to have. Springsteen spent a decade in prison, including time on death row. And when he got out, he said he lived every day being treated like a monster. And Maurice Pierce, the youngest of the 4, never came close to recovering. In 2010, during a mental health crisis, he stabbed an Austin police officer and was shot dead. He was 30 years old. His daughter Marissa was still a child. After the convictions were thrown out, the case went cold again. The DNA profile from the crime scene was complete, a full genetic fingerprint of the man who killed those girls. It existed. It was sitting in a lab file, but it didn't match anyone in any criminal database in the country. Whoever he was, he'd either never been arrested or never been swabbed. That's where the case sat for over a decade. Dan Jackson picked up the case in 2022 when he took over Austin PD's cold case unit. His supervisor brought him in on his first day, closed the door, and told him the yogurt shop murders were his assignment. Nobody had actively worked it since the wrongful convictions fell apart. Jackson dug in. He got shot in the line of duty during a separate case while he was working this one. He came back to his desk as soon as he was cleared. In June 2025, Jackson pulled the .380 shell casing out of storage, the one from the drain, and submitted it to a federal ballistics database that matches bullet casings across crime scenes nationwide. Every gun leaves unique marks on the casings it fires, and this system compares those marks against casings from other crimes. And the software had been upgraded substantially since the last time anyone ran this casing. Previous submissions had come back empty. This time, the system returned a hit. The yogurt shop casing matched a casing from an unsolved 1998 murder in Kentucky. Same gun, different state, 7 years apart. At the same time, Jackson went after the DNA. He requested what's called a YSTR search, a way of comparing the male DNA from the Austin scene against male DNA profiles sitting in forensic labs across the country. Unlike a standard database search, this one had to be done by hand. Jackson was asking each lab individually to pull their records and check for a match. Most came back with partials. South Carolina came back with a full match, 27 out of 27 markers, to a profile from a 1990 murder case that had already been solved. Yet the ballistics and the DNA had come from completely different directions, different databases, different states, different crimes. But they were converging on the same person. The South Carolina match came from a 1990 murder. A 28-year-old woman named Genevieve Zitricki raped and strangled in her apartment in Greenville. After killing her, the man had dragged her body into the bathtub and written a message on the bathroom mirror. That case had gone cold for decades until 2018, when a genetic genealogist named Cece Moore at Parabon Nanolabs used DNA databases to trace the killing to a specific individual. His remains were exhumed from a cemetery in Arkansas, and the DNA from his bones confirmed the match. The same DNA had been linked to the rape of a 14-year-old girl in Memphis in 1997. A man with a revolver had forced his way into her home and tied up 4 people before assaulting her. It was linked to a double murder in Portageville, Missouri in March 1998. A mother and her 12-year-old daughter. And both tied up, the girl raped, both shot dead. 2 hours after that, same night, the same man crossed into Tennessee and forced his way into another home. A woman fought him off. He shot her in the arm and ran. Ballistics matched the Tennessee gun to the Missouri killings. At least 8 murders across 4 states over the course of a decade. The method was always the same: break in, bind the victims, sexual assault, a firearm. He moved constantly and never hit the same area twice. None of it was connected while he was alive because every crime sat in a different state with a different police department and a different set of files. And even after all of it was finally linked in 2018, Austin still wasn't part of the picture. Nobody had any reason to look at Texas. Jackson's search is what brought it in. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers. He was a drifter from Virginia, raised in Alabama, who'd spent his entire adult life bouncing around the South and Midwest doing construction work, odd labor, whatever paid. One prior violent conviction, attempted murder in Florida in the mid-'80s, where he'd attacked a woman in her home. He served about 3 years of a 12-year sentence before making parole. After that, he never settled anywhere, got married, had a daughter, adopted 2 stepdaughters, and he'd been dead since January 1999, the same year Springsteen and Scott were arrested in Austin for murders they didn't commit. While the task force was building its case against 4 innocent men that fall, the actual killer had already been in the ground for 9 months. Brashers shot himself during a police standoff at a Super 8 motel in Kennett, Missouri. Cops had come about a stolen car in the parking lot and found Brashers under the bed with a loaded gun. He opened fire, then grabbed his wife and 3 children and barricaded himself in the room. After 4 hours of negotiation, he let the family go, put the gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. He died 6 days later at 40. Not one officer at that motel knew they were standing across from a serial killer. His name had never come up in any investigation, anywhere. He died looking like a man who'd run out of road, not a man responsible for at least 8 murders in 4 states. And then Jackson pulled up one more thing from Brasher's record. On December 8, 1991, 2 days after the yogurt shop murders, Brashers had been stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint on I-10, heading west through the desert in a truck stolen out of Georgia. He had a .380 caliber AMT backup pistol on him, same make and model used in the yogurt shop. He was arrested on the auto theft and the gun was confiscated by federal authorities, but the ballistics were never run against any open cases. A drifter picked up in the West Texas desert was never connected to 4 dead teenagers in Austin. There was no shared system in 1991. The gun went into a federal evidence locker, and the case stayed cold for 34 years. Jackson ran the final confirmation against the DNA from under Amy Ayers' fingernails. The likelihood ratio came back at 2.5 million to 1. It was him. On September 29, 2025, Austin PD held the press conference the city had waited 34 years for. Jackson spoke to the families. He told them this couldn't have been solved any earlier. The technology and the cross-state connections simply didn't exist until now. Then, he told them who actually solved it. It was Amy's fighting back that solved this case. Amy's final moments on this earth were to solve this case for us. It is because of her fighting back. She was 13 years old, and the DNA she raked from her killer's skin while fighting for her life in the back of that yogurt shop is what brought his name to the surface 3 decades later. Her father told reporters he had never been so proud of her in his life. The family had always believed there was something about Amy that would help solve the case. Her brother Sean pinned one of the original "We Will Not Forget" buttons, made by the victim's parents back in 1991, onto Jackson's lapel at the press conference. Eliza's sister, Sonora Thomas, stood at the same podium. She talked about the decades since, strangers in Austin who had stopped her over the years to say her family was in their prayers. Then she said their families are still too small. They are lesser for it. Jones was there too, the detective who'd been transferred out of homicide for insisting on physical proof over confessions. He'd been right the whole time. He came to the press conference to see it end. On February 19, 2026, Travis County held the exoneration hearing. Standing room only. The prosecutor stood up and told the judge the state had prosecuted 4 innocent men for one of the worst crimes Austin had ever seen. "The science and the confessions can't both be true," she said. "Brashers did this alone." Then she said it flat out. "We could not have been more wrong." Springsteen's attorney read a written statement on his behalf. He said he'd been persecuted every day since the arrest, that he'd lived every single day being seen as a monster for something he didn't do. She added that it was a miracle they were even standing in that room, and that the miracle came too late for Maurice Pierce. The judge declared all 4 men innocent. She called it an obligation to truth, to the rule of law, and to the dignity of the individual. Scott and Wellborn were there to hear it. Springsteen couldn't bring himself back into a courtroom. Pierce was gone. His daughter Marissa was there. She was a child when her father was killed in 2010. She stood up in that room, looked at the judge, and spoke to him directly. "Daddy, you have your name back. The world finally hears what you were trying to say all along." Amy Ayers was 13. Jennifer Harbison was 17. Sarah Harbison was 15. Eliza Thomas was 17. The last thing Amy did was fight. That fight solved it.